On this week's episode of the Archive Studio, we're going to talk about how to cure imposter syndrome, but we're also going to ask another question, which is, where is that imposter syndrome coming from?
Yes, medium cold brew episode.
Flat white episode?
Not small. This is an issue.
This is going to be a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're taking our setup a little bit more serious this week. Yeah.
Inching closer to seriousness.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Just incremental progress.
We put a light.
It looks pretty good on camera from what I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it. And I think that actually, that's a great jumping off point.
That is.
So earlier today, unbeknownst to us, we actually had the same professor in college who taught at film classes, right? I was an absolute idiot. You were not.
No, I was.
No. You had used a camera before.
Okay.
I hadn't. But one of the things that he was talking about was, when there's not a lot that's changed, maybe more so, maybe not. But then when students are coming in to his classes, sometimes there's this feeling of they've got all the tools at their fingertips they could possibly need, but then they're not doing it. And I want to bet, I'm going to throw this out there for it, and then you just take a run with it. Mm-hmm. How much of that do you think has to do with imposter syndrome?
I think a lot. I think, too, I want to be cautious as well. Just because there's a lot of information doesn't mean it's easy. It's almost information overload right now because there's so many ways to learn. It's what is the right way? Because then there's things that contradict themselves. All right, and what I mean is if someone is trying to get into something, there's a lot of information that they have, but it's also trying to figure out what is the right information versus the wrong information. And so, yes, I think imposter syndrome, the definition, not feeling like you have a seat at the table in a new era way of saying it.
Okay, do you think it's not feeling like you have a seat at the table or feeling like you do have a seat at the table, but you're not who everyone thinks
That's
you
good.
are?
You don't belong at the table. You're at the table maybe, and you're I don't think I belong at this table.
I have fooled them into believing that I belong here.
Yes.
Yes.
But I think everybody at the table feels that at some point in time. It's even this table, physically speaking, I don't feel like I have a seat at this table. I don't feel like I'm the person for this chair at times, but anyone could think that,
I think that's true. And so let's tackle the first question. Mm-hmm. What are some of the reasons that we feel imposter syndrome in the first place? So maybe you want to take this from the things that you've experienced. I'll share some of the things I've experienced. Yeah. So let me ask it again. What are the reasons that Austin Greer has felt imposter syndrome before? Where was it coming from?
I think the earliest stages were rooted from this. I grew up watching people who were very talented at what they did. And so that was what I felt was the standard. And so whenever I got into something that I love, if I did not meet that standard, which was very unfair because these were the top dogs at what they were doing. So then I'm holding myself to that standard and I'm creating things that I do love, but then I second guess myself into saying it's not good enough. I'm not the person that should be making it because I'm comparing myself to someone who's been in that area 5 to 10 times longer than I have. And now what I'm realizing is that there's people that look at me and think they don't necessarily deserve to get it started because I've been doing it 5 to 10 times longer. And guess what? There's still people who have been doing it 5 to 10 times longer than I have. And it's the same. It's just this rotating door of not feeling like your standard is good enough because there's always someone better.
I think there's no better way to say it than that. In fact, what I will call back to, I'm just going to be vulnerable here. Mm-hmm. I haven't told you this yet. When our film professor was here and he asked to see one of your pieces and you pulled up the piece, is it Griffith?
Griffiths.
Mr.
Piece. Griffiths. Yeah, Shout out Mr. Griffiths.
Yeah, you pulled up that documentary and I'm watching the first 3 minutes. I didn't know this piece existed. Mm-hmm. I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Because not only is your storytelling so tight not only is it varied, you're getting all these different voices. You had multiple camera. I mean, from a technical perspective, it was good, but from like a storytelling perspective, it was fascinating. And I was just really hoping he wouldn't ask me to see mine, because the documentary clip I had pulled up to show him, I immediately was like, man, it's not as technically good as that. It's not as dynamic of a piece. And so I think the thing that I would add on to what you said about imposter syndrome is sometimes it has nothing to do with the years of experience you've had. Sometimes it has to do with exactly the opposite. Someone else who comes along and is like a savant at storytelling or a technical aspect, that then all of a sudden you're like, man, am I useless?
Yeah.
You know? And so I wonder how much of that is there are just so many reasons that we could spend the rest of the day here and never get to the bottom of where the imposter syndrome comes from, other than broad categories.
Yes.
So what would you name those categories to be?
Well, and before I even name those categories, I want to kind of go into that. Like, whenever he did ask to see one of my favorite pieces, I was like, oh boy, like that is I've never been asked that.
Yeah.
And I think it was the film Professor Ingham. He was like, let me see your most proud work. And I've never been asked that in my life. And so,
by the way, for the audience, he was nodding along at places. He was laughing, like he was into it. Okay, go on.
But when I pulled it up, and I hadn't watched it in probably a year, this would be one of my keys, and I want to say it now before we even get a little farther. Like, this would be one of my top keys into combating, into defeating imposter syndrome. Go back and look at your most proud work. Go back and look at where you once were. Because there's two kind of categories to that. Either you've created something that you're so proud of that every once in a while you need a little glimpse of it to realize, like, okay, I did do that. And then also, like, there's times I go back and look at work from a year ago, and I'm thinking, what in the world was I thinking? But the thing is like, I've realized every time I've done that, I have defeated that thing that keeps me thinking I'm not worthy enough, because I look at just a year of growth, and I'm like, wow, I have came a long way. If I just give myself another year, what am I gonna think about the work I'm doing now? Like, am I gonna be twice as good? You know what I mean? And so there's two sides of that. Number one, look back at the work like you're proud of, because I think that's one of the easiest ways to combat this feeling of not feeling like you're worthy enough to be doing what you're doing. And then two, like, look back at the work just from a year ago, and you'll surprise yourself how far you've come just in that short amount of time. So re-ask your question, because I have no idea what you said.
No, I'm really glad that you diverted and went your own way. If we were to say, okay, all of that is true, but let's consider what are the broad categories, because I think it might be a fool's errand for us. I mean, we're not therapists. We're just two guys who've had some experiences.
Yeah.
There are broad categories that all these different sources of imposter syndrome come from. So the one I might go with first is, I feel like a lot of my experience with imposter syndrome has just been insecurity. Like, I don't feel secure in my skills, in who I am as a person, in my ability to conduct myself as a businessman in a professional setting. Insecurity. Do you have an area, like a broad category that you would define it as?
So I would say that hasn't been one of the areas I've struggled with. And there's this, I guess influencer is the right word, businessman I follow, and some of the people listening may know him. I know I introduced you to him, I believe, and that's Jesse Itzler. So Jesse, I think he started in the music industry. He is now like kind of, I mean, he's still in business heavily, but he's on the like back end. Like he's finally getting all the fruits of his work. But he's part owner in the Atlanta Hawks. And he says this thing though. Whenever he was about 20 years old, he was a millionaire. They just hadn't paid him yet. He says that. He says, every room I went into, I knew I was a millionaire. They just hadn't wrote me my check yet. And so that feeling of insecurity, that's not something I can relate to, because I've always felt like I've already accomplished, or I've already done the things like I want to do in my mind. The right people just haven't seen it yet. And like I feel like even him saying like I'm a millionaire, they just haven't paid me yet. I feel that kind of in my like soul. Like I feel like if I just press down hard enough and kind of fight those demons of like, nope, you don't deserve to be doing this every day. If I just fight those demons every single day, I believe that the right person's going to encounter my story, my business. And I truly believe like what I want to do in my mind is going to happen, but the right people just haven't seen it yet. Like that, like I agree with that like mindset. Now here's my categories though. Back to your, I went on my own path.
It's fine, man, because everything you're dropping is gold. Go for it.
The two categories of imposter syndrome to me that I've really dealt with. Number one, the compare game, which I guess is a little bit of insecurity. Comparing my journey to someone else's, my chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 5. Like I've been really bad about doing that. I like just get into an area and then I look at someone else who's been in that area and put in a lot of work. And I think that's one thing that I've struggled with. The other one, and I had it on the tip of my tongue, now I can't think. I think it would be lack of experience. Something I've noticed from sharing this space like with you already is that you're very technical and you know technical camera stuff compared to me. And so that's been something I've been like, man, I just don't know what I'm talking about. Like when you're in a room with someone else who knows what they're talking about, it has opened my eyes to like, man, I have no idea really some of the things that I think I know. So
well, I think that goes both ways because I'm learning a ton too. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. What I think would be interesting, so I feel like we can somewhat confidently say we've addressed the first question, which is let's identify the sources. In order to cure it, or to take our best attempt at curing our imposter syndrome, I think we do have to identify like where are those gophers sticking their heads out of the dirt? Like where are the moles coming up so we can address them? And that's probably a poor analogy because I don't feel like it's whack-a-mole. Like it can be addressed, and like you said, just like different practices that can help build your sense of fighting off imposter syndrome over time. But I would say now let's go into how have we, or how would we prescribe others to attempt to begin fixing that? Yeah. So what would you say?
I want to hear from you first.
Okay, yeah. So I would think the biggest thing for me has been taking just a massive amount of work. So every time I hit record on my phone, I consider that a video.
Yep.
I do. And I know there's a lot of people that are like, well, if you're not putting it into a movie editor, you're not putting music or effects on it, that's not making a video. And I would say, well, that's a silly opinion.
Right.
And the reason I say it's a silly opinion is because think about for a moment how they used to shoot older movies, right? Film cameras rolling, right? And there was just such a point where there wasn't all of the effects that you would do in post-production, right? It was story, and like what you got is what you got. So I would consider that first of all. But when I begin to factor in all of the Instagram stories I've made over the years, all of the different videos I put out on social media, all of the YouTube videos, the videos I've made for clients, the videos I've just made that no one's ever seen because I was practicing different techniques, like I had made literal thousands. I would say upward of maybe around 5,000 as a low estimate. And so the reason I can walk into a room and know some of the technical camera stuff is because I've made so many mistakes, like a god-awful amount of mistakes. So I think the best way for me over time to address my imposter syndrome has been two things. One, admit when I don't know and be super fast to admit that. And the second one is to then just practice on that particular thing.
I love those. Yeah. Mine would be, like off the top of my head, and this is a piece of advice I got from a young business owner roughly 5 years ago. And I was doing some video work for her business. She was a very successful business owner, young 20s, six-figure business, not even a handful of years into business. And I was really struggling with the acceptance of other people and my business. And she told me this piece of advice that I'll never forget. And this is the reason I quit my full-time job and went into my videography business full-time. She said, people will only take you as serious as you take yourself. And the moment she said that, a light switched, and it has never switched off. And and there's a flip side to that is like, don't take yourself so serious. Yeah, I get that. But also at the same time is like, if you convince yourself that you can do this thing, people will see and feed off that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this would be my thing. Because I think that's such a brilliant way of saying that. You're a filmmaker as the moment you turn the camera on.
Yes.
And anyone that would say that you're not a filmmaker until you've submitted to a film festival, my thing back to them would be, how dare you stand in the way of the person that's new to the game? Because there is no room, as far as I'm concerned, in our industry for that type of policing other people, right? Like the moment you hit record, you're a filmmaker.
Yes.
There is something coming through that lens onto the camera sensor, on the SD card, CFast, whatever, and that is legitimate and it's valid. And I think the only thing that you have to do from there is you have to continue, like you said, take yourself seriously by stacking up experience.
Yes.
And so, yeah, absolutely. Take yourself
Can I
seriously.
give a few examples
100%,
as well of like once you do something, you are that thing, like once you convince yourself basically. So 2 examples, 2 of my good friends that I call some of my best friends and people I look up to. Mr. Griffiths, the documentary that I was showing you just a few hours ago. So shout out Mr. Griffiths again, and I can't wait to have him on the podcast. Mr. Griffiths, his story, Ryan Griffiths, is very unique because what happened is he came from a very small community and he went off to the military and he started sharing his struggles online before he, so after you left, we only showed you a few minutes of the mini doc, but I rewatched the whole thing after you left. And he said that in his mini doc, he said, I started sharing what I was struggling with online before I started sharing it with the people that were closest to me. And what I think he meant when he said that really is, now that I've thought about it for a few minutes, he started sharing those things with himself. The form was just, hey, I'm going to post this to TikTok, but I'm going to address it with myself. And what happened, literally millions of people began to believe what he was preaching because he fully convinced himself first. So he went on a year sobriety from alcoholism, and people bought in because he believed it himself first. So that's my first example. Second example, another good friend of mine, Seth, other people know him as Red, he's a filmmaker. And the month of June, he went one day, a piece of content on his Instagram, and it was like a vlog, like a daily vlog every single day of the month. And what happened, like the first few days, like I noticed like a few people caught on to it, but after like 5 days, people were hungry for like that daily vlog. And so what happened, he just convinced himself, hey, I can do this thing. Like, hey, I do filmmaking. Hey, like people might watch if I convince myself that it's worthy enough to watch. And that was like immediate. Like, so then what I realized the second, third weeks, he would get like 10 comments, like, and people were pumped up for the next day, and then people were sharing it, and like people were bought in, and then at the end of the month, people were like, you cannot stop this.
That's awesome.
And all it was, what I'm imagining in my head was, he's like, I don't know if I should do it, right? No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to convince myself I can do this for a day, like once every day. Like I can make these videos. And then people bought in. So I think that's all it is like convince yourself that you deserve it, and then people will buy into it. And not in like a salesy way, like an organic, genuine way.
100%. And I think that's the thing that, so if we're addressing people who share in the insecurities, the imposter syndrome, we're not addressing those people who are like the people that come to mind when you're like, ooh, I don't want to be like that person who's just, full of themselves. Typically, if you're concerned about people thinking that you're being narcissistic or arrogant, like you're probably not that person. Like if you have the self-awareness enough to be afraid of being perceived that way, you most likely aren't. But I think that speaks a lot to the cure, if we were to call it a cure, because I do think it is one of those things like you have to just continue to do over time, is just do it anyways. And not to rip too much off of Nike's just do it, but I think there is some courage, or there's some validity to that. And I think it really is the definition of courage, is being able to do the act that you're afraid to do in spite of being afraid.
Yeah.
And taking a chance on it. And here's the deal. There will be a lot of people who will say, no one's going to care, that you're putting your stuff out on social media, like your friend Red. Yeah, listen, man, no one's going to care. Like, if you do it, you don't. They might actually care. They might, give you grief
There's
for it.
no flip side. There's no downside.
Well, I mean, I think that I would argue that maybe there is. Maybe your friend group does, just drag you.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? But to your point, I think you're right. When you consider all the possibilities, even if you fail, that's the thing, man. Even if something creative that you do fails, you have experienced more growth than you think you do. Just from building the confidence to do something that most people won't do. I forget who, I think it might have been the CEO of Instagram was talking about the analytics on the amount of people who just consume content and never put content out, or hardly do.
Yeah.
And it's something like 1 in either 99 or 1 in 10. It's a pretty big ratio of people, most people, majority of them, a high majority of them, will never regularly produce content.
Yes.
But there's a ton of people that will, or there's not a ton of people who would just say, you know what, let's do it. Let's try it out.
I love that. Well, I got this question for you. So we kind of spoke more so to the people who were kind of afraid, I think. Now I want to ask you this. What about the person who is talented? What about the person who has it going, but still can't flip that switch into just being consistently good at whatever it is? And I think we're leaning more towards content creation people, but this goes for any business at all. Feeling like you're not doing a good enough job, or you're not good, when in reality, this person is phenomenal at what they do. People want more, but they can't convince themselves to do more because of, I think it probably is a little bit of insecurity, or just lack of confidence, or so, I don't know, or maybe feeling, I know I got a lot of clients who are so good at what they do, and I'm show more of yourself. People want more of you, and they are scared of what people might think. They're egotistical. What would you say maybe to those people?
Their invitation is your permission. The moment that you get invited to sit down with a business, they want to hear.
Yeah.
The moment that I was first invited to sit down with a company whose budget was in the multi-million dollars a year, I realized if I didn't show up, even if I felt scared, then I was going to miss a massive opportunity. Threw out a number, $36,000 for the year. That's the contract for some work. And they're like, yeah, totally. Which then I was like, why didn't I charge more?
Yeah.
But I think that's it. I think there's a point where I knew I was talented. At this point, I had worked with a producer out of LA. At this point, I had been working and producing content for the school system. At this point, I had done, private work. But it was that moment where I stepped into the world of corporate business and was invited to sit down that I realized I am talented. I get that. I'm not great, but I am good at this. It is the moment to be fully who I am. Their permission, or their invitation for me to sit at this table, is my permission to be fully who I am. And I did, and it's done nothing but grow from there. And so that would be my recommendation. If you're talented, it is time to go all in. And that doesn't mean you work and ignore your friends and family. That means that you give yourself the permission. Hey, I'm gonna throw caution to the wind. It's the old adage of you can't control the wind, but you can set your sails. I know that that's a cliche proverb, but dude, if that's not the most true thing, I will say this: if I'm good at anything in life, it is adapting to which way the wind is blowing. And that's not about my convictions or my principles. That is about which way are the winds of my talent going, and adjusting to set sail for that.
I think that's good. I think another component to it that I would like to add to, and as you were talking, I was just kind of thinking about our podcast setup. and this is like the most perfect example. So I'll start with this. Like, one of the issues I think of imposter syndrome is not having it all figured out. That's one of like the biggest reasons people have imposter syndrome and will never start things because they feel like they need to have it all figured out. And I get it. Like, that is one of the most daunting things ever. Here's a few counterpoints to that argument, I think. Number one, no one cares. Number two, they actually care more that you just started it when you didn't have it figured out.
That's it. Yeah. Let's go.
And then number three, one of the best ways to combat that, not having it all figured out, is find yourself a community. And here's what I mean by that. There's been multiple times already, like we've been in this studio, and I'll like pitch something to you, and you're really good about just going with the flow and like we'll figure it out later. I'm the exact opposite. I like to like feel like things need to be perfect before they start. And what's happened is like you've just like fed into the negative or fed into the positivity and like not even like fed into the negativity at all. Like I'm like, well, do we need to get the mics ordered? Do we like what do we need before and you're just like, hey, let's just roll with it, you know? And like the first episode, you were even like, I was like, well, what about chairs? And you're like, yeah, we'll just throw these chairs out here. And it's my favorite episode so far because you were sitting in a chair that almost broke.
I guarantee 250 pounds sitting in a plastic garden chair. This is not a great idea.
And my mind was blown. I was like, but what about what people will think? And then what I realized is people just loved seeing where we were at. Like nobody wants to see the perfection. They want to see what leads to the chase of perfection, because perfection's never really there.
That's the point.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So listen, that's the thing that I tell clients or folks that are getting into the game is people want in on the climb.
Yes.
So I just worked with a keynote speaker who came in and spoke at a conference. Her name's Allison Levine. Mm-hmm. Brilliant woman, just fascinating story, incredible speaker. And her deal is that she climbed Mount Everest, was a part of the first women's national team from the U.S. Like, just awesome story. And like, I won't give it away because people need to go look it up and listen to her and read her book, whatever they want to do to interact with her story. But her story was fascinating because I'm sitting in the back of the room, right? We're at the comms table. I'm talking to backstage, all these different things. And so it would have been really easy for me to not hear a lot of her story, but I kept getting drugged back into her story because she made the story about the climb.
Yeah.
The multiple climbs, actually. And that's what was so fascinating. She spent so much time, so much of her keynote. I mean, I'm tracking the amount of time she's spending talking about the climb. And just at the very end, kind of mentions the destination.
Yeah.
We weren't the entire room was in the palm of her hand. We were not interested in the summit. We were interested on her overcoming all of these challenges.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this Monday or Tuesday when we were in the car. It's like, we talked about how much time it takes to even get you have to. So talking about Mount Everest, like you have to spend weeks and weeks to get ready to go to the top, and that's so fascinating. Like the top is just for like a split second, right? And I mentioned this guy before in another episode, Nick Bear, big fitness guy. So I am very like proud of my like fandom over Nick and his journey because I was watching him for the last 4 years, and what I've come to realize is he's arrived. He's made it. He's got the like million, probably almost close to $1 billion business now, like multi-million dollar business. I don't enjoy watching his content as much as I once did because I started watching it when he only had 3 employees. And I could not wait to watch the next episode of how he was going to problem solve, of how he was going to build this like business. He was just starting to like really grow a fan base, and I was encapsulated by like all of it. And now like he's gotten to the point where it's all just perfect and like, things are smooth. He's got like teams and systems, and I'm like, I watch his videos still, but I'm not as pumped because and even when I tell people about him, and I think I've told you about him, I'm like, I tell you about like his journey like for the last 5 years of how he built this thing out. Like I don't talk about what it is now. Like I may mention that, but again, people want to see not even struggle. People just want to see the real authentic things it takes to build something out.
Without a doubt.
Yep.
I mean, think about it. So go back to the podcast example. Episode 1, this is now episode 4. Episode 1, we're like on that side of the room, no lights, no table, the weird couch and chair set up. And then, so we start to figure it out. And so I think what's neat about that is, and like we've made no qualms about like when people watch these, this is intentional. We said this from episode 1. We're saying it again in episode 4. The reason we're doing this podcast is to document what is it like to do whatever this ends up being. This morning, we were just talking about another idea for what this might become. Dude, we have no idea what this will look like in December,
right?
Let alone next July. And so I think when you consider that, that's the part that I'll just say it, man. It's the hardest part for anyone who has felt the initial spark of I want to do something creative, and it's going to be in front of people. So on social media, for example, they feel the initial spark, but they don't want to do it because they're so scared that they're going to do something wrong. And my encouragement is you are going to do something wrong, and that's what people want to see. It's not that they want to see you fail. They want to see you succeed, but part of every good story is adversity.
Yes.
That's what we as humans want to see. We want to see Rocky Balboa get knocked to the ground and fight his way back, man.
Well, and now, like, specific to content creation, create things you want for yourself in 5 years. We don't have a large amount of people watching this podcast. That's okay.
Yeah.
If we grow it to a point where people are watching this podcast, here's what I will say. I hope we're still creating the things that we want to watch 5 years from that point too.
Without a doubt.
Because right now, like, that is the case. We're just we're talking about things that we're experiencing, we're going through, and then I hope 10 people watch it, and that's it. But if 1,000 people watch it, that's great too.
Sure. Welcome.
But welcome 1,000 people.
Can you imagine?
But
that's ridiculous.
Like in 5 years, like we just get to watch it back,
Yeah.
and we get to say, "Man, look at where we once were."
Yeah.
And now we're hopefully a little farther.
Yeah, and I think again, when you consider the question we asked at the beginning of how do you cure imposter syndrome, it's a little bit of all this.
Yep.
It's a little bit of the stack up your experience. It's a little bit of a do something even when you're scared. It's a little bit of you have to have dreams that are worth, again, the ingredients for a cathartic change is that you realize the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing.
Dude, that's so good.
And that's why I like, let's go back, let's just call it what it is. Back to your point earlier about when do you consider yourself a filmmaker? When do you consider yourself a business owner? Like going to the gym for me. I've never been an athlete my entire life. Right. December 15th of 2023, I finally decided to take the brave step of stepping into a CrossFit gym. And I've been every single day since during the weekday that I've been in town. And I love it. And a little bit of that was like, man, but I'm not like, I didn't play football, I didn't play baseball, I was in band, like, like all these different things. And then I was like, wait, I think I am an athlete. Like I'm showing up every day, I'm training, I'm not training for an event, but I am training to be stronger and all these different things. I'm pretty sure this counts.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this counts as being an athlete. So I felt like an imposter in that environment, but because our coaches are so supportive, the people in the class are so supportive. It's like, man, yeah, let's do this.
Well, is the guy that played football 10 years ago but never works out now, is he still the athlete? It's like,
well, and I mean, I'm sure there are things like, that I've changed my identity on perhaps, but I think that is a large part of how do you cure imposter syndrome. There's just a certain point where you begin to realize that your identity can become whatever you choose to become. As far as adjectives are concerned, you want to be a business owner? Sell something, and you are now a business owner.
100%.
Now, obviously, you got some paperwork to fill out, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing.
Yeah. Let's try to like practically wrap this up in terms of like what, because I feel like we've done a good job of like broad sense, but now like practical, maybe like
let's do it.
In the next month, in the next like 6 months. I'm really struggling with imposter syndrome. Like, how do I get over it? Like in the next 6 months. You have anything that really comes to your mind off
Listen, so my brother is in the process of getting his graduate degree and becoming a therapist, and so he's also a law enforcement officer. His day. I've told you some stuff, like it's insane what he goes through. But one of the things he's helped me to understand is it's literally the idea of washing the cup. That's what it's the image that he uses. So if you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling like an imposter, if all these different things, just bring yourself back into the moment and wash the cup. Now, what does that mean? It means that you do the things that you know are going to they're the everyday thing. They're the flossing your teeth, but they're more about perhaps maybe your mindset, your body. So for me, what does that look like? I mean, I did it earlier. I was sitting over here making a pitch video. I think you had your back turned to me, but I turned the video camera on, light, mic was set, and I just sat there for a second, closed my eyes, took some deep breaths, and just kind of got into that frame of mind. So like that's it for me. Like daily exercise, eating well, making sure I'm sleeping, making sure I'm hanging out with my kids and my wife, making sure I watch or interact with things from a creative standpoint that really fill me up. If I do all of those things really well on a daily basis, wash that cup, dude, all of a sudden when I come in and I need to do it, it's right there.
Yeah.
And I'm not facing the same imposter syndrome because I'm addressing the stacking on of wins and habits that help me feel right.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes 100%.
How about you? Give me the glimpse into the Greer methodology.
This would be mine, and I think it's something I've been striving for the last 10 years is like, and I just want to use the like metaphor of the table. I really like that in terms of imposter syndrome. So if you feel like you don't have you don't belong at the table, like, and what that means is like, you know, you're trying to like be amongst like these people that maybe you look up to or maybe you want to be around. And this can be in content creation, this can be in business, this can really be in a lot of different things. Here's what it was for me. It wasn't the right table. And so what I was trying to do is like I was trying to conform to everyone around me, and that's just not who I wanted to be. And so what I did is, number one, in some areas of my life, I created a new table. And I brought the people I wanted at that table and I think this studio is a beautiful example of that. Like, we created something here, and now we're just like, who wants to be a part of it? And I think for me, and we've talked about this, like this has blown me away in the community, the amount of positive feedback we've gotten from just like this thing already, and people want to be a part of. And so like what we did, we saw there was an open area for something to be created. And what we did is kind of like we just created this table, this metaphoric table, and now we're just saying, who wants to be a part of it? Like, you're welcome. So that's the first thing is like, if you're trying to conform to this table, maybe you just need to make your own, or maybe you need to go to the one who actually has the seat at the table for you.
Dude, it's so good. I would say, here's my closing thing on that. My mom was really good when she was raising us, that the thing that she rewarded wasn't success. It was the try. It was the attempt.
Yeah.
And so when I consider the reason that I have such good friends that I do now, that I made after I turned 30, people talk about that all the time. How do you make friends when you're an adult? Right. The reason, business-wise, the way things are going, the reason, this is going is I just have always put the measurement on how I feel about myself on whether or not I'm putting myself out there. Mm-hmm. Am I risking it? Am I trying? And I think that all of the things that we want in life are on the other side of trying. Because, again, going back to that whole setting sail metaphor, people will complain, oh, I don't have any friends at this point in my life. Oh, I don't have the business opportunities that I want. Oh, I don't have this and that. And listen, life is hard, man. I have a lot of things going for me that other people don't have. There are other people that have a lot more going for them that I don't have. So I don't want to speak in a way that's like condemning of people. Yeah. I just want to present some like brotherly, like aggressive encouragement. I get it. But do you think that you're going to be able to get there if you don't at least raise your sails? Yeah. So that when the wind does come along, you catch it. And I think that's the only thing that I would say, the only reason I have been somewhat successful in my life is because I was just willing to suffer massive like failure and just be like, well, okay,
Right.
raise them again,
Yeah.
you know?
Perfectly said. I don't have anything to add to that.
Rock on,
I
my
love
brother. All right, so let's close out this episode of the Archive Podcast. This is episode 4. I'm pitching it to you on the spot. We have not talked about this. What is the next episode about?
Man, I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, so if I was thinking about like needs based off of what we've talked about so far, right? So we talked about first episode, let's document this thing. Second episode, we talked about something. Third episode, we talked about the biggest mistakes that you could make in business, right? Like what are the mistakes to watch out for? This one, how to cure imposter syndrome. If we had to make episode 5, like right now, I think one of the things I would talk about is like what happens when you create a system around you that helps you succeed. Okay. So specifically, what do you need to do on an everyday basis? And we might talk about the controversial morning routines, right?
No, I like that.
We might talk about what boundaries you need to have in your life.
That topic is actually one of my most like, what's the word?
Favorite? Exciting? Passionate?
Passionate.
Okay.
That is one of my most passionate topics is the things you do to set you up for success every day. Like that's something that I'm very passionate about.
So this is the balanced episode 3 where we talked about don't make these mistakes. We're saying maybe try these things if you want to succeed.
Well, I'll give man.
Go for it. No, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So Matthew McConaughey says this in his book.
Yeah.
We both read it. He says when things aren't firing on all cylinders, right? What I do is I go back, read my journal, and I figure out what I was doing on the days things were. And so what was I eating? All right, that's the glimpse I'm getting into the next episode.
So listen, we're going to close it out before Austin does the entire next episode right now, which will be okay, honestly, if you wanted to. I'm down for it.
I'm passionate about that.
All right, so thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time on episode 5 of the Archive Podcast.
Peace.